if this was just another movie with the company recall in it and you're just telling another story of that, this movie's actually not half bad.
I will say the original one, I feel like because it was an hour and a half, I feel like the plot in a way was rushed. But it was 1990, it was campy, it was cheesy, it was your average Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
Yes.
It was everything that we've all grown to love.
But the thing is, the story itself of you've got this guy whose memory was erased and now the new person that he's becoming, which they really touch upon in 2012, is it's not about your past, it's about your present that makes you who you are.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, you know what? That's a really good point.
I would never have used Colin Farrell. I would have actually used Jeremy Renner for this part and not Colin Farrell. I think Jeremy Renner would have been a completely better fit for this role versus Colin Farrell. Jeremy Renner has the martial arts, the action hero on that level.
There is so much blood for absolutely no reason. I mean, he karate chops a guy and there's just an explosion of blood out of his nose. And then when he's done in like the first fight scene, there's so much unnecessary blood, but it's amazing for that reason.
Where's Mars? What, like, they totally changed the story, but watching it again, I go, I'm really glad they didn't use Mars. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Black and White Reviews. I'm Lee.
I'm Will.
I'm Chuck. And I'm Chuck. I don't know who's going second. Whatever.
Yeah, and today we're going to talk about Total Recalls.
Plural.
We wanted to talk about this. So it's been, I don't think I've ever had a chance to stop and really like watch both of these movies and really compare them. I mean, I know when I saw the 2012 with Colin Farrell, I had a lot of issues with it because I just didn't want to see the movie be remade, you know, because the movie was great as it was because of what it was. So now I wanted to revisit and look at it and say, okay, just knowing what the movie is, knowing that it's different, let's take a look at it kind of, you know, without the initial bias that I once had. And when I mentioned, hey, Total Recall, Chuck was like, ooh. And then you were like, well, I don't get to choose anyway because I chose a bunch of movies in a row. So whatever you want to do. So that's pretty much where we are. So first, I wanted to ask you, Will, what you thought. What is your feeling about these movies? Like, what's your history on like the original and the new one, and you know, kind of where are you coming from?
So obviously, I love the original. The original is a fantastic movie. It is all of the wonderful things that, you know, 80s, early 90s sci-fi action movies are going to be. It's campy, it's corny. There is a ridiculous amount of blood in that movie for absolutely no reason. It's just wonderful through and through for all of those reasons. And a lot of them I'll get into later, but I mostly want to focus on the 2012 movie and why it didn't do well. It didn't do well because it was a remake. It didn't do well because the name Total Recall. If this was just another movie with the company recall in it and you're just telling another story of that, this movie's actually not half bad. I enjoyed what this movie was when you strip away the references, when you strip away the callbacks, when you strip away the loosely tied together storyline of both movies. This is actually not a halfway bad. This is a halfway decent movie. This is not a bad movie. It's not the train wreck that I thought it was in 2012 when I watched it, or even in the years afterwards. Watching it this time around, I watched this one first before I went back and I watched the 90 version, and it actually sat a lot better with me this time around. Wow. So I will say that. I think it was a wise idea to make the remake the way that they did it, in the sense of it's not a comedy. The original Total Recall is straight up. It's a comedy because Arnold Schwarzenegger is ridiculous. Outside of that, it really exactly what Chuck is doing right now. There's none of that. There's none of that. campiness or corniness going on in the 2012 movie. The 2012 movie is actually a lot more serious. And I like that. I think it's a great change in pace because you couldn't do the same campy comedy nonsense that you did before, because that would just be another comparison that everybody's going to throw on top of the pie. Yeah, without getting into a whole bunch of specific details of what I'm talking about, that would be it. This movie sat better with me this time around than it did prior. I think if this movie was named anything else, I think a lot more people would feel that way. The direct reference I'll make to that is Split. Why was Split fantastic? Because it wasn't called Unbreakable 2. If the movie Split was called Unbreakable 2, that thing would have bombed, because everybody would have been comparing it to the original, and, you know, the surprise at the end wouldn't have been a surprise. This movie shouldn't have been called anything else. This movie should have been called something else. It didn't have to be Total Recall the remake. You could have named this anything else that you wanted and just had the company recall be a central plot. And that's it. That's all you would have needed, and I think this movie would have done a lot better than it did. So those are my opening thoughts. That is what I think about the 2012 version. Again, the 90 version, there's not much I can say. It's amazing. I love it. I still love it to this day. And yeah, Arnold Schwarzenegger in the original is ridiculous. He is everything that he should have been in that movie. The special effects are awful in certain places, and like I said before, like in the original 90 movie, there is so much blood for absolutely no reason. I mean, he karate chops a guy and there's just an explosion of blood out of his nose. And then when he's done in like the first fight scene, there's so much unnecessary blood, but it's amazing for that reason. And some other things that were going on, but that's it. That's my opening thoughts. That's how I feel. That's where I'm at.
Very nice. Chuck?
Very nice.
Very nice.
So I watched the Schwarzenegger one first. And then I watched the 2012 one. And I will say there's only two things that ruined the 2012 one for me. One, it's a remake. And I'm like, Will, if this, I was actually watching it, and I was like, if this wasn't if I wasn't watching this film comparing it to the original, this movie would be fantastic.
Yeah.
And I would never have used Colin Farrell. I would have actually used Jeremy Renner for this part and not Colin Farrell. I think Jeremy Renner would have been a completely better fit for this role versus Colin Farrell. Jeremy Renner has the martial arts, the action hero on that level way better than Colin Farrell, because Colin Farrell at this time, for his action roles for like martial arts, he had what, Daredevil under his belt?
It wasn't martial arts.
And that was just like, you know.
No. Remember, he was a martial artist in Horrible Bosses? He took karate?
Sure. So, but Jeremy Renner would have been, I mean, he was coming off the back of, you know, he was still Hawkeye.
It was the same year as Avengers, 2012.
Right.
So,
and he was also Jason Bourne.
well, that's, yeah.
So he would have fit that part a lot better, in my opinion. Outside of that, I mean, they spell recall differently. Rekall.
Even though the movie is titled Total Recall,
Yeah.
RECALL.
They could have titled the movie Recall. REKALL.
Yeah.
And it's a different storyline. Change up the names of the characters a little bit more, and it would have been its own film.
Yeah.
The other thing about that too is Jeremy Renner was in the Bourne Legacy this year as well. So he did 2 movies that actually made him known the same year. So, although I agree that he might have been a good fit for it, he wouldn't have been known to be the good fit for it because it would have been the same exact year. If it was like a couple years later, absolutely. I totally agree. I just think because he had 2 big movies that came out that year, he was not well known yet.
All right, then I still probably would have used somebody different than Colin Farrell.
I would have.
you just don't like
I
Colin
would
Farrell.
have used Ethan Hawke.
Yeah.
I
He
would
was
have
there.
absolutely used Ethan Hawke. They had him. It was right there, and he, you know, arguably in this movie, he looked better suited for the role of, Quaid than Colin Farrell did. I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah,
That's
maybe.
just me. Because
I don't know,
I
just
was like,
seeing
when he showed up in the hologram, I was like, oh, I want to see more of Ethan Hawke. So
Yeah.
Right. Well, just seeing Colin Farrell with Jessica Biel, it just doesn't. It does not work. Like, not even a little bit.
Nah.
Mm.
Not even a little bit. And I mean, for me, the storyline is different. It's different enough where it could have been a different movie.
Mm-hmm.
The special effects were great. In the second movie, the special effects in the original were hot garbage.
For
but
1990,
but it was-
they were par.
They were. I don't know if they were par,
For what they were doing.
but I mean
be.
the end of 2012 Recall was more realistic than the end of the original Recall. I mean, hey, Mars has
An atmosphere.
a nice enough ice underground that creates an atmosphere above. It's kind of ridiculous,
But then
but
all of a sudden there's a blue sky.
and all of a sudden there's a blue sky and it's like Earth all over again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I would just echo everything Will just said, because I was thinking that while I was watching the film. I was like, if this was an original, it would have done a better job than being. It would have done a better job because it is a different movie. It's a different feel. There's just a handful of ties back to the original.
Yeah.
And they're using the same actors and the same characters. They did switch it up. Like his wife, Kate Beckinsale is what's his name in the whole way through.
Yeah.
So there are those differences. But I will say Lee before was like, all she does is walk towards them, and I watched this with that, and I'm like, nope, she doesn't.
No, she doesn't.
There's a lot that happens in this film.
Right.
I will say the original one, I feel like because it was an hour and a half, I feel like the plot in a way was rushed. But it was 1990. It was campy. It was cheesy. It was your average Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
Yes.
It was everything that we've all grown to love. It was, it was fantastic. I mean, there's not many complaints around the original. My only complaints around the new one is Colin Farrell and the fact that it's a remake. If it wasn't a remake, 1,000 times better.
Yeah.
I could have done without, and I'll give one example of like the references that I'm talking about that were just completely unnecessary. And there's one where Colin Farrell's going through a checkpoint and you have a woman that's saying, yeah, I'm going to be doing this for 2 weeks. Why do you have to do that? That was just like...
They even had her in like the yellow sweater.
Yeah.
They did it to throw you off.
Yeah.
Well, they did it to throw you off, but they also did it for like... There was no other reason why that was there except for nostalgia. That's the only reason why that was there. And it's...
And to throw you off, because you're thinking that's him.
Yeah.
Initially, yeah.
Until the thing starts kind of glitching out and you're just
glitching out, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
fine. But yeah, like little things like that, I was like, I don't know about this. But
yeah. Well, me, I don't know. I don't remember when I first saw Total Recall. But I definitely remember, I don't know, I've probably seen bits and pieces of it when I was a lot younger, but it was probably not until I was in my teens where I really saw the movie. And then, like, it was like, oh, this movie's amazing. Now, think about this. Like, Terminator, the original Terminator came out in 1984. And then 6 years later, they put this out. And it's a very different role for him, obviously. In 84, Schwarzenegger was not a super well-known actor.
he's
but
coming off
after he
being
did-
a bodybuilder.
Right.
So,
And
yeah.
so he's at this point he's really getting more and more into acting, and he's done movies between Terminator and this, and it's just amazing kind of see like where he's gone between them. And he's got the one-liners. There's a one-liner in it that he says that's like, oh, what's he say? It's like it's a line that doesn't even make sense. Oh yeah. At the very end of the first movie, he says to the guy that he kills, "See you at the party." Like it doesn't even. There's nothing like.
Say that one more time. The guy who kills.
So I'm not. I'm trying
Arnold
to
Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, he kills somebody and on an elevator, and he goes, "See you at the party." And I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, it's not even like a funny pun.
Oh, at the end. when you
Yeah.
Push with the yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does not lead to anything. There's no party. There's nothing that even means. But you watch something like Commando. Commando probably had like the best one-liners and the most kills.
Well, Commando
But-
was just a kill count movie. That's the
Oh,
only
yeah, it
reason
was
why you
ridiculous.
watch that. It's just to count
ridiculous.
how many people he kills in that movie. It's ridiculous.
Oh, yeah. So
But,
I mean,
but what you were saying, I mean, this is on par with other things that Schwarzenegger was doing in the early '90s. This is
Right.
This is right up there with oh my God, Last Action Hero. This is right there with it.
I know I'm not saying this is different. What I'm saying is like you can see that like this is kind of like right in the middle of the Arnold days. When Arnold had like all the movies, because once he got like there was 84 and this is 96 years later, and then like 95, 96. That's pretty much where Arnold's like big prime ended. Anything else after that was
Mr.
kind of
Freeze.
Yeah, Mr. Freeze. He did like Eraser, End of Day, or what was it? End of Days?
The Sixth Day.
The Sixth Day.
The Sixth Day.
Was. I love the Sixth Day. I think Arnold in sci-fi movies is just.
Well,
It's
then he went
amazing
on to do
'cause he
it.
can be goofy.
The Expendables.
Yeah, the governor stuff and the Expendables and whatever.
And
Yeah,
now he's a State Farm agent,
yeah, yes, he is.
like a
He
good
wears-
neighbor.
Neighbor.
That's what I said, neighbor.
He wears khakis. Anyway.
He wears khakis.
So my thoughts on this movie is like I really appreciated the original for what it is. The campiness of it is perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, you've even got Hank in it. He plays a role. He plays Tony, the guy with the face there. And his voice is like so distinct. But I remember when I first heard of Dean Norris, I was like, I know him from other stuff, and he always plays like a SWAT team guy. Wasn't he a SWAT in
He was a SWAT
Terminator
team
2?
in T2.
In T2, exactly. So, it's funny to see, like, he's been in a bunch of stuff. I mean, everybody forgets that even Michael Chiklis, not that I'm comparing bald guys to bald guys, but Michael Chiklis was in Seinfeld as a totally different type of character.
Probably.
Chiklis was known, I think he was in, like, a sitcom, too, as, like, a funny dad, like a goofy, heavy-set dad, balding dad.
Anthony
And the next
Banks
thing-
was an agent in Beverly Hills Cop 2.
Yeah.
At the beginning,
Yeah,
where they're at the oil field or whatever like that. He's one of the
Yep.
guys that comes in with the glasses and everything. Yeah, so
Oh yeah, so it's cool to see everybody
Yeah.
kind of coming in. But anyway, you've got him there. The movie itself is just fantastic. So then when I first saw the 2012 one, now I was a very different person in 2012. This was like, I mean, it was 12 years ago.
yeah.
But like I went to watch the movie basically saying they shouldn't have done this. Why did they do this? And watching it and going, "Where's Mars? What like they totally changed the story." But watching it again, I go, I'm really glad they didn't use Mars. So, like, I completely agree with what both of you were saying. Watching this movie now, I go, you know what? It's really not a bad movie. It's a
not.
fantastic movie. It's done very, very well. It's just the fact that it's a remake of a movie that I love so much
Yes.
is what makes me go, I don't see why they couldn't have just come up with something new. But the thing is, the story itself of you've got this guy whose memory was erased and now the new person that he's becoming, which they really touch upon in 2012, is it's not about your past, it's about your present that makes you who you are.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, you know what? That's a really good point. And that explains why, that whole dilemma of, Quaid versus Hauser. Hauser was the dude, and then Quaid is this new made-up character who ends up becoming the hero in the end. It's like because he was put in that circumstance, he became a good guy. So in the end, the good guy who was made up wins.
Yeah.
Right. I think what the
And
difference
it's a really
is,
cool
though,
concept.
is you have movies like this, like the remake, the reboot of RoboCop, Dredd versus Judge Dredd.
Yeah.
You have all these remakes, which all of them bombed compared to these nostalgic, campy, cheesy science fiction action movies that we all grew up loving. When you have movies like 2049,
Mm,
where it was a continuation, or
Oh, yeah.
Ghostbusters, where it was a continuation,
right.
they're rebooting it, but it's a continuation and they're bringing the nostalgia in. Those tend to do better.
Mhm.
Yes.
Like when they did Afterlife did really, really well
Right.
because it was a new story, but it brought back in all the old characters for nostalgia's sake, but it was following a different line.
Right.
If they did, like, if they called it Recall,
Mm-hmm.
Rekall, and they did it, when did the first one come out? 1990. So
90.
we're
Yeah.
what, 32 years later?
Right.
So if they based this 32 years down the road
22.
on
22.
30,
Yeah.
you're right, 2012.
Yeah.
I'm doing it today.
Yeah.
So 22 years later down the road, and they did it on Earth versus having Mars being part of it, because there is a clip in there of, if you want to go to Mars, and he's like, I'd
Yeah.
love to go to Mars.
Right. Right.
You know,
right.
so they're touching base on that. So if they did a whole new story, called it Recall, had it 22 years in the future, and had different characters, it would have been 1,000 times better than what it was. But because we're comparing it to what Schwarzenegger did, what, you know, all these actors did, like, what's his name, who's the bad guy who plays Jester on Top Gun?
Michael Ironside.
Yeah.
I mean, you got these big names, and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And then you're sitting here watching the new one, going, how are they gonna do what they did in the first one? And then you're watching it going, this is a completely different story.
I think
Yes.
I agree with you. I think the only thing that they would need to do in order to make it more of a continuation is change the whole secret agent, double agent
Well,
background.
no, you
thing,
can still
because
do the secret
you
agent,
ca-
double agent
you
thing. All you
can,
have
but
to
it's like-
do, all you have to do is not call him Quaid and not
Right.
name this movie Total Recall. You can do
Right.
anything you want. If you want to do another secret agent mission, and because they did it in this movie, it had nothing to do with Mars or an atmosphere or people needing air.
Right.
They could have
Right.
absolutely done another
if they
secret
changed if they
agent.
changed all the names, they could have had
Yes,
something else going on. Like,
100%,
oh,
yes.
guess what? Recall sparked somebody else. Like, because the way they did it here was it actually activated him again when he went to recall because of what they were about to do, and it reactivated him in the phone and blah blah blah. So yeah, they totally could have done it. It's just that they had to change all the characters' names and not just redid it. But like, it could have been an amazing sequel. It could have definitely been an amazing
Yes.
sequel.
That's what I'm saying.
But
Yeah.
but the thing is, there's a lot of people out there who would sit there and say, this is just a rehash of Total Recall with a different scenario. But I think, yeah, well,
But
what
that's
else do you
what a
expect
sequel
for
is.
a sequel? Right. But the thing is, people poop all over stuff.
That's
And
what a
and-
sequel-
I mean, Blade Runner 2049 was a continuation
a continuation
Right.
of the story.
of the original Blade
Right.
Runner.
But
Right.
you know
So
what
you're
made
dealing with
what
the
made
same stuff. It's just you're bringing it closer to home, and you're bringing it up. You're modernizing it.
right.
So, yeah, of course.
what made Blade Runner 2049 work was you weren't questioning Ryan Gosling throughout the entire
Right, yeah.
movie of whether
Yeah.
or not he's a replicant, but you were questioning Harrison Ford. That's the one big change they made to 2049, was you're not questioning the main protagonist. It's
Right.
completely like left out there and out in the open. It doesn't even hint at that in the movie. If they did, they would have said the same thing about Blade Runner 2049. This is just a rehash, remake, and now we're questioning another person or whether or not they're a robot. That's exactly what that would have been. But it
Right,
wasn't.
and the switch in this one is when he went to recall, it reactivated him. Where
Yeah.
in the original, it didn't reactivate
No.
him.
Well,
I
we'll
think-
get into that later.
Yeah,
We'll get into that during
schizoid
spoiler territory, because there's some wonky
Yeah.
things going on there, I think. But
There
I think
is wonky things. What-
everything that we're saying right now can apply to sequels as well.
Exactly.
Pitch Black. The sequel to Pitch Black was Chronicles of Riddick, and both are fantastic movies. If
I thought
Chronicles
the
of Riddick
Chronicles
was
of Riddick
named
was a sequel or a prequel.
No, it's a sequel.
It's a sequel.
Riddick
That's
why
is
she
the prequel,
is-
isn't it?
Oh,
No,
okay.
Riddick. Nope. So it does it in order. So Riddick is years after everything has been done.
You're right.
Pitch-
You're right.
I didn't
You're
watch
Pitch
that.
absolutely
Black
right.
is the first,
Yeah.
and then what's her name takes off, and then in Chronicles of Riddick, he goes back and he finds
So
her, and she's like,
Oh,
That's,
yeah,
but
yeah,
that's
8 years
but that's
older.
the thing.
Yeah.
That's why Chronicles of Riddick was so successful, because it wasn't called Pitch Black 2. You can
Right,
get
right.
away with so much just by naming it something different and having your main character go through a completely different story. That I think
Yeah.
that should have been done here, and this movie would have been like, as of right now, if this movie wasn't called Total Recall and he wasn't named Quaid, and this movie was anything else, I would give this movie a solid 7, 8 out of 10. But because of
Yeah.
all that other stuff, it drops down to about a 5 for me.
right.
I'll say that right.
It's like it's like Taken, and then you have Taken 2 and Taken 3. They're all the same story. They
Yeah.
all made money.
Yes.
All with the same 3 actors.
All with the
Yeah.
same skills.
Yes. Yes. And they
Yeah.
but they were just taken by different people and had to go find a different way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. You know, it's like Stranger Things. The same thing happens every year almost. But they have a different way of figuring it out and a
Sure.
different, you know.
Sure.
So this would have just been a better sequel than it would have been a remake. And I think that's the thing too, is when you look at it, if they never made Total Recall and they just made this as an original film, it would have been better too.
yeah. Yeah.
The story as is without the original would have been fine. But when you're comparing it to the original, you're going, okay, now I'm a little at this point. So
Yeah.
The big problem, and this is still non spoiler. The big problem that I have with the 2012 version is, I won't name drop, but the antagonist was not believable at all. I did not buy him one iota.
No?
I didn't buy it at all. At all.
Really?
Especially like when you get to the end and it's like the final showdown. Here we go.
You're talking about 2012?
Yes.
Yes.
Really?
Yes. I hated him in this
Huh.
role. I hated it.
Wow.
I hated him in this
Because
role.
this is 4 years into. I'm surprised.
Okay, I said I wasn't going to name drop to avoid spoilers, and you just have to go
I didn't
ahead
say
and do it.
who.
Okay. Let's just go.
I'm trying to say let's get into spoiler territory at this point, because we're gonna want to get into detail here. We know how we all feel. We love the original, but we actually don't mind the new one if it's its own story.
Fine. Okay.
So that's pretty much where we're at. So that being said, Chuck,
if you want to continue the rest of this via video and you want to see all of our lovely mugs while you're listening to the podcast, please find us on patreon.com/blackandwhitereviews. At this point in time, the video will end if you're watching this on YouTube. Where if you're watching us on YouTube, you can also find us on Facebook at Black and White Reviews. You can also find us on Instagram at Black and White Reviews 1866. And for those of you not on YouTube, like, follow, and subscribe to us on YouTube at Black and White Reviews 1866. With that being said, we're gonna slide right into spoiler territory. And I wanted to say one thing in spoiler territory before we break off into our whole conversation.
Go for it.
There's, to compare the two, in the original, when he goes from Earth to Mars,